click go live, and it's Elke Thoms, right?
Yeah, Elke Thoms.
Thoms. Perfect.
Yup. That's me. Let me see.
When this goes live, then like right now, I'll read your introduction and then I'll welcome you and we'll start talking away.
Oh, awesome.
We'll just see where it goes.
I love
You never know.
Love a good chat.
Yeah, you just never know when, two different generations get together. What could happen?
Absolutely.
Yes. Facebook, thank you for tuning in today. And we're on a comic spot. And I'm just going to make sure while you're sitting down and grabbing a drink, I'm going to make sure that I made this public, because there's nothing worse than you trying to find it. And I'm sitting there going, oh, no, I wanted it private. Here we go. I'm pressing public so it can be shared. Facebook, this is Comic Spot. And it doesn't matter who I am. You know who I am. But today what matters is I have a special guest. I was on a show and I saw this amazingly beautiful, young, talented, hilariously funny comedian. And I said, I want to find out her life story in 15 to 30 minutes. And I'm sure that she wants to do nothing but have her whole life flash before her eyes while she's on video. So here we are. So I'd like to introduce you to the beautiful, talented, hilariously funny Elke Thoms. Hi, Elke.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on, Linda. This is awesome.
Absolutely. I love having people on it. I have no life, I'm talking about pre-pandemic, no life. So imagine now.
Well, I feel like you have quite the life now, because I was stalking you on Facebook and I was like, whoa, she does so many cool interviews. Like, this is so great. So I bet you hear a lot.
I do. I'm having fun and I get to be nosy and I seem it's the superpower, So every once in a while I make people laugh, like I'm going to try to do right now. I put in a few little fun twists while I do your intro. I hope you don't mind, but it's hard to be serious.
I hope you don't mind if I take them, if I like them. Go for it.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Let's do this. I would be delighted. So today, Facebook, here is the intro that Elke Thoms sent me. Elke Thoms, see, she's already talking about herself in the third person. Elke Thoms is a comedian and writer based in Los Angeles. Oh my gosh. She's first found her comedic voice in Boston. Who finds their comedic voice in Boston and doesn't come out better? Oh my gosh, Boston is the place for really good comics. No wonder you're so good. She's performing while she was a student at Northeastern University. After graduating in 2018, she said, thanks, but no thanks to freezing winters and moved to Los Angeles. Smart girl. Where she's known to drive an extra 20 minutes to find a Dunkin Donuts. See, I told you she was smart. She performs at venues including the Comedy Store, Flappers, Flappers, and Laugh Boston Festival, OMG. Performances include Laugh Riot Grrrl Festival and the Burbank Comedy Festival, where she was named the Best of the Fest comedian in 2019. I can't do this monotone, you guys. This is too cool. A playwright and a poet. Her latest play, All My Eyes Walk Into a Bar, will be performed.
Oh, X's. All my X's. I have far more X's than I's. So I think that's crucial.
My goodness, talk about eyes. I need mine checked. All my exes walk into a bar. Wow, sounds like the start of a really good joke. All My Exes Walk Into a Bar will be performed in the Chameleon Theatre Circle's 2020 New Play Festival. Wow, holy Toledo. No, not even Boston, never mind. And her poetry is featured in City of Notions, an anthology of contemporary Boston poems, and the Charles River Journal. This girl is serious. This is dope stuff. Oh my gosh, you are not playing. Welcome, Elke Thoms.
Thank you. Thank
A
you.
writer, a playwright, a poet, a comedian. You don't sing?
No, I wish I sang though. That's actually funny you say that. Growing up, that was the talent I wanted, and it was the talent I did not receive whatsoever. And
Because you look just like Mariah Carey, but people probably think people probably think you look like Taylor Swift.
yeah, I get Taylor Swift a lot, but the funny thing is I never got it once until I got the bangs. You know, before the bangs, I would have loved that compliment, but I never. So I'm like flattered, but I also know it's 100% the bangs because I never got it before them. So.
And so, like, when you talk about the bangs, you don't mean Gangnam Style. She bangs. You bang.
Fringe, yes.
So how long ago did you get the bangs and what made you go with the bangs?
Ooh, yes, love this question. I got them in 2016. Yeah, I sort my life as pre-bangs, post-bangs. I had wanted them for a while, but my hairdresser, I had finally found a hairdresser that I liked, and she kept talking me out of them. She was like, no, I mean, she'd see me come in and my hair would always be a mess. And she's like, I know you can't handle the amount of work the bangs take. And so it goes. I did go through a breakup, but outside of that, a couple of other things happened where I was just feeling kind of low. And I was like, I just need a fresh start. And I walked in and she was like, hey, and I was like, I sat down, I was like, I'm getting bangs today. That's it. End of conversation. And she was like, okay, like, you know, here comes the bad Yelp review. And I thought I had made a mistake for about a week because it is a little like having a pet, you know, you have to like maintain. But then after a week or so, I was like, you know, it was like being a new mom. I was like, you know what, I made the right choice. I'm really happy. So.
So it's like being a new mom, have your bangs come out with a gender reveal party?
No, I never went that far. In fact, I didn't tell a lot of people that I was getting, you know, like my friends, not that it needs to be such a big announcement, but I loved the few weeks that I was walking everywhere and everyone was like, wow. So, yeah.
It's very dramatic and very beautiful. Looking at the pictures that you sent me, especially this particular one.
Oh, thank you.
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous. My former roommate, Ariel, took it. Fantastic photographer. We were actually in like an alley and there was like one stray bush. So it did not feel like a place I should get a proper headshot, but it turned out to be great.
Oh, wonderful. Oh my gosh. Some of the best selfies, you know, sometimes you take a selfie, turns into a great headshot.
Yeah. Well, what I have happen is I'm like, okay, this doesn't work as a headshot, but I feel like I know my angles really well. And then I'm like, I'll have days where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go take some great photos. And then I get in front of the camera. And I'm like, okay, maybe you don't know, but like what you have to do is.
Oh my gosh. So talk to me about you grew up in the Boston area, or at least you went to college and started your comedy. And was that the beginning of your public life? Tell me about your early life and your early entrance into public life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually grew up in the DC area, but my dad's family was from Boston and he went to school there. So it was always kind of like a second home type feeling. And prior to going to college, outside of watching Conan O'Brien like every single day, which should have clued me into something, I really didn't have much interest in comedy. Writing, yes, like I was writing poetry and plays like since I was a kid. That I was always, and they were always comedies, but I never pieced together, oh, how about you get up there and do it, rather than always giving it to somebody else. And then when I went to college, like midway through college, I just saw like an ad for a comedy class and I was like, you know, what the heck, let's just do it. It'll be fun. It's like outside of school. I was feeling like I wanted to do something in the community that wasn't at my school, you know, just to like see more of Boston, meet people. And I still remember I went and I don't know if I have a resting bitch face, but I have a resting face that sometimes says that I'm really like, it just looks like I'm really dissatisfied to like be anywhere. And I remember I must have had that face on, probably because I was so focused. But I remember so clearly on my first day of class, my instructor was like, she was like reading the rules of the class. And then she was like, okay, and Elke, could you like look a little more excited to be here, please? And she was like, I promise you, you're going to have fun. Like, so I must've just been like, you know, like, what am I doing? And I remember I did feel really out of my element. You know, I'd signed up. I was like, this is going to be great. And then I got there and I was like, wait, like as a kid, I hated like even book reports. Like, what did I just sign myself up for? And then the journey for me was sort of that I did stand up every once in a while for like 2 years. So I would do it once and I would be like, the first time I got up, I was like, that was awesome. Cool. Now it's out of my system. I just will never do that again. And then like 6 months would go by and I'd hear of somebody doing a show and they'd be like, do you want to come on? And I'd be like, okay, yeah. And I'd do it. And I'd be like, oh my God, that was so great. Okay, now it's out of my system. Now I'm like, good. And it really took moving here to pursue my writing that I was like, what the heck are you doing? You're so happy every time you get up there. You got to just go for it. But like, actually, like, you know, pursue it, you know, go to mics, do shows, all of that.
So the very first time that you went up, you said afterward, you're like, good, I got it out of my system. But when you were up there, like how nervous were you to do it? And how did that go the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would describe it as like that roller coaster feeling that I hear other people crave. I personally hate roller coasters, but I totally understand where you're like so nervous, so anxious. And I think you're the most nervous walking up. I remember I was like, what if I can't get the mic out of the stand? Like, oh yeah, like that's never happened to anybody. Like what, this is just catastrophe. So many things could go wrong. And then once I got up there, you're just sort of in it and you almost don't have time to be nervous because it was like, oh, okay, they're only giving me 5 minutes. And you know how new comics being, I was like, and I have 15 minutes worth of words that I want to say. So I was probably talking too fast, too much detail, whatever, but I didn't have time to be nervous. And I did have time to enjoy the like laughs and the feedback, probably not as many as like now I listen back. I'm like, oh gosh, like put a punchline in anywhere. But yeah.
On the donkey, it would have worked anywhere on that donkey.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like watching it back. I'm like, how about now? How about a joke here? But then afterward, I was just like, that was fun. And I always have liked making people laugh. And, you know, I think at first it took me a while to get started because we know like it is a lot of work. You have to prepare. You can't just wake up and go do a tight 5. You have to prepare. You have to force yourself to think about it. Like, I think I would get so nervous that I would be like, I'm going to push it aside. So it took me a while to dedicate that time. But then once I did, it was like, there was no looking back.
Wonderful. So what are some of the things that you've been able to accomplish along the way doing comedy? If we're just talking about you in public performing just your comedy, what are some milestones that you've passed that you're so proud of? Like tick marks, like check, did that, check, did that.
I love that. I'd say doing my first festival was the Burbank Comedy Festival in 2019. That was amazing. And to be in Best of the Fest, given it was my first festival, felt like, I mean, I'm definitely one of those kids growing up that I was always like pushing myself like way too hard, you know, but I wasn't even expecting that. I was like, this is just your first festival, just go have fun. So that was great. I think also performing in different cities, even if it's like not as pristine a gig as it would be in LA. Like I performed at this like dive bar in Nashville because I was going to Nashville for the weekend and I was like, I should do a show there, you know, and I couldn't get booked at like Zanies. So I was looking at like, okay, well, who's doing like a random comedy show? And I wound up just at this dive bar comedy show. And it was like, you know, half regulars that were definitely not there for comedy. They were like, oh, fuck, it's comedy night. And then like the other half were people from like a medical convention that had all gathered there after. And it was just like the most bizarre audience ever. And behind me were like Rolling Stones posters. I was like, this is so not like my brand, like all these things. But it was like so fun. And I was like, hey, I'm doing it. Didn't get all the laughs I was hoping I would, but I was performing and being like, this is going to be like a story I tell, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so along the way, what would you say was the Burbank Festival, was a great experience, but what have been some of the best scenarios and some of the hardest scenarios without having to name clubs? Like, what's a really great experience and a really lousy one besides the one at the dive bar in Nashville? Let's hear some more.
Yeah, I mean, I think great experiences for me, when I don't even mind a really small room, but when you can just feel that everybody is so tuned in, like, honestly, I feel like some of my best experiences have been in rooms of only like 15 people, or 20. And I don't know if it's that energy where it's sort of like, I think there's a tipping point where the audience like wants to work with you and they like want it to work. And as long as you're not blaming them and you're like, okay, look, the 15 of us, we're going to have the best Friday night we can right now. There's like a really fun energy that happens there. The worst, honestly, I think the worst is just when you, and we all know this is just part of the game. It happens when you invite like your work friend to the show and then you're like, you get there and they're like, great, Elke, you're on at 1 a.m. We had to throw in like, 15 new people, whatever, we're mixing it up. And you're like, okay, thanks for coming. Like, I'm going on at 1. So but you've driven all this way, so you're trapped. Enjoy, and that's not even a negative for me per se, but just knowing that like, okay, I hope you like 5 minutes from 50 people. And we know that can happen in LA in particular, so.
So I have a question for you. Where does your comedy come from?
Yeah, totally. I think that like growing up, what kind of got me writing comedy in general was I've always been that person, either in my family or in my friend group, that when it gets tense, I diffuse it with a joke. Always, always, always. Doesn't matter, family, friends, tense moment, I'm going to make a joke about it. And I realized that I had the ability to do that. And I think as a result of that, a lot of my comedy is about interactions with family and friends. Because what I would start doing is when I would do that and when it would get a laugh, I would write it down and pull that as inspiration. So actually something I try to work on a lot is writing from outside my perspective a little bit more, because, I worry it can be like too specific to me. But we all know also what I enjoy hearing about from other comics is their own perspective, because I can always find ways to relate to it as long as they're being honest about that. So it's a lot of personal experience, a lot of humor about my family, friends, dating, upbringing, all that good stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. So when you write a joke, let's say you feel inspired right now and you envision something funny, does it come to you as a premise, a punchline, a word, a thought, a feeling? How do you hear the joke before you write it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think often I start with just one line, like, okay, I have a joke about fencing. So I fenced growing up, and I remember I've been thinking for a while, like I should talk about that because that's so weird. But like, it's also so weird that I wasn't sure how to write about it. And I never sat down and wrote about it. But then one day it just popped into my head. I was like, fencing is like learning to sword fight with someone if you all arrived to the fight in a BMW. And that's the joke. And that just came to me like in one line. And then I was like, okay, I have no clue how this is going to fit in. So that one line sat in like my phone notes for a while. And then probably a month later, I was writing a little bit about like the bangs and how I don't do sports anymore. And then I was like, oh, don't do sports anymore. Have this line about fencing and we'll put that in there. So I think what's hard about comedy is that unlike like writing plays, I can be like, okay, you're going to write for an hour, sit down and write. Comedy, I don't think you can really do that. I mean, you can, but you're not going to get the gold nuggets. You have to just wait for them. And then it's almost like the sitting down time is like just your organization of it.
That's very true. Very true. I had like 38 pounds of jokes that I wrote in 10 years. And I was carrying them from city to city because I've moved a lot. And at one point I said, and I felt so guilty, like I was always ignoring my little children. I finally threw out all my children, and the minute them down the laundry, garbage chute, a whole bunch of new comedy came to my head, because it was like all those jokes, I felt so burdened to use them that new material wasn't coming to me until I threw them out.
Yeah. And I feel like you probably had this moment too. You look back on something you wrote and you're like, that's hilarious. Why am I not saying that every night? This is hilarious. What? And it's just because you haven't worked out where exactly it's going to go, or the organization. Totally. It's half the battle.
Yeah. I think that every time I've asked a comedian this question, I've been delighted that they feel it too. So I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
I think most comics I've asked have no trouble saying which joke that they wrote that barely flies, barely gets laughs, but they wrote it and they use it for themselves. They don't care. They're not taking it out. You have one of those?
Oh my gosh. See, this is so funny because I actually work so hard that I'm like, Elke, if it's not getting laughs, like, part with it. It's okay. But that being said, okay, I do have one. And it gets laughs. You know what it did to me? It got a huge laugh like twice. And so I was like, this is an A+ joke. And then it like hasn't gotten laughs since, but I'm like, no, but we got those laughs that one time. So, and that's that I say, like, so it's great. It's, it's like, like an ex or something. You're like, well, we were in love once. It hasn't been great since then, but it's fine. They're there for me. That's how I feel about this joke. And it's that I say that I grew up in DC, but I moved to LA, and it's now been 3 years since I've worn anything from Vineyard Vines. Right? Like, it's kind of funny, but it's one of those things that it's like, I don't know if it's like, I'm performing in like East LA and nobody has even heard of Vineyard Vines. I don't know, but like sometimes it's just like, okay. And then sometimes I feel like if there's like one or two former Lax bros in the house, it gets like a big laugh, but it has to be a really specific audience.
I have this one joke. I mean, I've got a lot of jokes that tank, but my new one that tanks is, I just moved to Vegas, and I heard there's nonstop partying, I got here just in time for COVID, and there's nothing going on. Have you ever been in Sin City when there's no sin nowhere, and that's the setup for what I think is the funniest part, right? And so of course I have to add to it, and I go, everywhere, there's no Elvis in any building. It's like every Elvis has left every building. And I think the line is miracle, and nobody's laughing. And I don't.
So good. That's so tight. Oh my goodness. No.
Like when I go to Elvis, they're like, nope, not Elvis. You don't need to be upset for Elvis, he's happy where he's at.
I like that joke. You keep that in. That's clever as far as I'm concerned.
It's when I think they probably can tell that I think it's so clever that they refuse to laugh.
That is the big weakness. I do feel like you cannot deliver your jokes with any sort of feeling that they are the best things in the world, even if you should be proud of them, because no one likes somebody. I mean, nobody likes a person like that. So.
Can you talk to me about what would be the epitome of your success? Like, everybody has a certain venue or accomplishment you want to get out of comedy before you feel like you've done everything. Me, I would love to perform at Madison Square Garden, even if it's in the bathroom, I would just die to tell a joke in that building.
Totally. Oh, I love that. I think for me, it truly would be having a full hour released as a special. Yeah. Feel like that's what I could say, oh yeah, like I did it, I mean, I hope I would continue from there. Like, that is my intent, but that feels like the big goal that is like on my bulletin board and that I'm like trying to write right now as though what is my total 60 minutes gonna look like? Like there are other things I would love to achieve as well, but that just feels like the big hurdle to like answering in my mind, like you're a serious comic, you know, regardless of its success, just to have that as my like launching point almost. I think for me, that's my biggest like top of mind goal for sure.
Right now, you know, like I have a very self-deprecating way of life. Like I take myself 0% seriously, right? And you know, like, so when I got up on stage first, I've been writing for 10, only on stage 6.5 years. And so I love making fun of myself, but evidently I was doing it to such a degree it would make the audience uncomfortable. Have you ever experienced that?
I do think with audiences, I don't know if it's because I'm kind of like, I know I look young and I'm very like, I feel like my eyes are kind of big. So sometimes I can look a little deer in headlightsy when I don't mean to. And I've definitely delivered jokes and had the audience go, "Aw," and I'm like, oh God, like, no, I'm fine. Like, it's okay. Everybody relax, you know, like, I try to play it off. I usually say something like, okay, I did not wake up this morning. Like, I hope they all go, "Ah," you know, but I had to come up with that because it would happen so often. And it just makes me feel like I'm like a 6-year-old standing there in like a little tutu or something. Like, you know, like they're like, "Oh, like, oh, I hope she's going to be okay." You know, I'm like, no, this is just the setup. Like, it's, let me, you know, yeah. So that's the uncomfortable. I rarely say anything too like raunchy or risque that the audiences have not experienced, but that I get a lot actually, where they're like, "Is she okay?" I'm like, okay, like, I'm good, thank you.
Have you ever gotten heckled, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I've gotten a bunch of just like, I get a lot of like, "Oh yeah," or like, "No," you know. I haven't gotten anything too awful other than yeses or nos. And it's kind of easy to be like, "Oh, thanks for, you know, throwing in your 2 cents. Glad they agree with me." Nothing that's been too bad. I have dealt with a lot of like, as we all have, like drinks falling, alarms going off, you know, like once I was performing in a restaurant and like the fire alarm went off, like, so I've been heckled by like inanimate objects quite a bit.
That's
Yeah.
funny. That's a funny line.
Yeah. Yeah. For whatever reason, like real people seem to actually, if anything, I think I'm a little like, I'm very prepared to be heckled because I keep like, I think going into comedy, that was one thing I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get heckled. People are going to be like, so, and so I'm always so ready for it. But knock on wood, everything has kind of been, that's been okay in that respect. I think now that I'm thinking about it, the only thing would be, I have my bit about my boyfriend, Chad, who is a guy who is very comfortable with like his feminine side and like talking about politics and like, you know, he listens to a lot of NPR, like he's very with it, like, and I will be halfway through the bit and there's always someone that wants to be like, "Oh, he sounds gay," you know? So eventually I had to write responses to that, but that's just one of those things that I'm like, okay, I saw that it kept happening. So then I built a few jokes in that address that. That's the only thing. Because sometimes I'm like, okay, sometimes it's the audience telling you that. I try to view it as they need more information. I know that's not really what they're saying, but that's the
I totally agree.
Yeah.
We need to listen to the hecklers.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, they're looking for some information there, you know? And so that's how I try to view it. Absolutely.
That's wonderful. What a great outlook. How come are you so wonderful? Because I feel like you have an old soul, or you were raised by really good parents, or you were raised by a grandparent. I mean, you're so not a person who dismisses me because of my age.
Well, my parents, I'm the oldest sibling. So I think that's probably part of it. You know, I just, I always had a little bit of a hand in raising my younger sister. You know, my parents did a great job, just like naturally that is the role that you get assigned. And I loved it, because for me, I was like, oh, oldest means I'm the best, and I better be great, because she's got to be a little me, so. And it's a good way to check yourself, because then if you ever caught yourself doing something wrong, it's like, oh, she'd be doing it 2 weeks later, and you'd be like, oh, that was not a good idea. So I think that had a big hand in it as well. I'm a Capricorn, which is the sign that is very ambitious and like on their shit all the time. I think we're known for like not believing in astrology, which kind of lines up for me, but here I am mentioning it, so who knows? So I think that has to do with it as well. I think it's because as a comic, you have to be an observer, and that's always where I found myself fall into that category for sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So since you have a lot of your comedy that comes out of responses to other things, and when there's tension that you use a joke in your life, I would imagine that you're fabulous when you're being heckled by inanimate objects. That you're probably talking about the elephant in the room is right up your alley.
Yeah.
Drops a tray of glasses or somebody falls or whatever. I would think you'd be great at that then.
Yeah, I certainly try. I mean, I do think a lot of my comedy comes from reacting to things. That is something I actively work on, though, on stage. I'm also very committed to what I have pre-decided I'm going to say. So I think all comics have to, or try to work on, that I know I try to work on, is I'm like, okay, you have this, but also you have to let yourself be in the moment. And when things happen, even if it's not a heckle or it wasn't disruptive, acknowledge it, because people want to see that you're like in the room. But yeah, if like, I just remember doing one show and it was like right at my punchline, this like truck just honked outside for like 30 seconds. And it's like, yeah, something like that, you better acknowledge that. You can't just be like, because it's also easy. You just have to go like, I know, right? And everybody's like, that's hilarious. And it's because they're like, oh, good, she's like here with us. She's not just like saying her things. You can't be reading the menu that is your jokes, like.
Yes. What's the funniest thing that came into your mind when you were present in the moment that you're like, wow, that I didn't even plan to say that. That was hilarious.
Oh.
Or that you've seen other people add.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, actually the thing when people went, aw, like that happened to me like 10 times. And it was on the 10th time that I said, guys, come on. I didn't wake up this morning. Like, I'm hoping they all go, aw, today. And it was out of just that pure frustration that I was like, and in my head, I'd been like, you need to come up with a response to this. But what I hated was it took 5 or 6 times, or maybe 10 or whatever, before I was like, okay, here's my response. But I do like that once you come up with a response like that, it's like, oh, now I can use that every single time. Or this applies to multiple situations if it's some other response. So it's sort of like you kind of form a cheat sheet to your own spur of the moment thing.
Yes. And then you start building up an arsenal in your tool belt of things to pull out.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So you have a life besides comedy. So can we speak to the other aspects of your performing life?
Yeah, please. Would love to.
When did those start? When you write, you've written plays, you've written a one-woman show?
It's not a one-woman show. It is just a straight play. That's the recent one is called All My Exes Walk Into a Bar. I've written 4 or 5 stage plays that have gotten like regional productions. So that's kind of exciting. Okay. This one I wrote in quarantine, like earlier this year. And I joke, I literally think it was because the place we really couldn't go was bars or restaurants. I mean, I'm still not going to them, and I missed it. And I was like, I'm just going to write a play set in a bar, because that's the one place I really can't go right now. And the concept behind that play is that it's a woman like swiping on a dating app, Tinder, Hinge, whatever, But in her mind is all her past relationship experiences sort of weighing in. But you sort of don't know that. And it's in the format of all her previous exes are in a bar together. And I just came up with the idea. I don't even know that my exes in particular, like in real life, would be all that interesting. I just came up with the idea, like, it would be so cool to like meet get all the people that have dated the same person together. Like I was even thinking, I was like, I would love to be in that bar with like the 5 other people that like my ex dated or whatever, and just like see what they, and just share stories, chat, like it, what a concept. So that's sort of the idea I had in my head, and I went with that.
That's a really good premise. My goodness. That would make a great reality show.
It would. Totally.
Like
totally.
It should be the prequel to The Bachelor.
Yeah. Right. All the exes come together and they share their, reviews of the person. You definitely would get and I'm sure there'd be some that would be like, hey, they were great. And then there'd be other people that were like, I had a not so great experience. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So I have a funny story about my dad. He was with my stepmother. My dad went through 3 marriages, and in the top of his second marriage, it's like baseball. The top of his,
I love that.
He's in a restaurant with his new wife, and her ex walks in, and she's done nothing but rave how handsome he is. And now he's there in front of my father. So my father's like, he's trying to act relaxed. So he puts his elbow down and he's just trying to do this to look relaxed. And she says, Erwin, this is so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And have a seat. Mary Lou invited him to sit down with my dad. And so my dad's just sitting there acting like it doesn't matter. And so then the previous husband left, and my dad's sitting there, and Mary Lou says, honey, your elbow was in your pancakes the whole time. It really happened. I think it's hilarious. And even if my dad, imagine somebody being nervous seeing the ex and trying to look relaxed.
Oh, I can so believe that in that moment you would put your elbow in a pile of pancakes and not notice. I mean, that's hysterical. But it's one of those things that if you saw it in a movie, you'd be like, okay, that's too much. But no, real life is in fact funnier. Like that's what happens.
Yeah, it'd be funny to put it in a movie, and see this guy going like this, and then the camera pans away to his elbow.
Yeah.
Like Aunt Jemima. Whatever. Oh my gosh. So you've written plays, and what else have you accomplished besides being best of the fest at the Burbank Festival in 2019? You had, what else have you done besides comedy, plays?
Yeah, and I've written poetry as well.
Talk to me about your poetry.
Yeah.
The poetry.
Yeah, so the poetry came from being an emotional preteen. That's where it started, as it does for all of us, and that always kind of came pretty naturally to me. I became an English major when I went to college, as I'm a big literature nerd, so that was something I was always doing. And but I didn't really send it anywhere. Like the poetry was always sort of for me. That was just for me. Whereas the plays and all of that, I was really hoping would kind of get picked up. And then, as an English major at school, I became editor-in-chief of the Literary Arts magazine. And so then I became aware of all these other places you could send your work. And I was like, okay, so what the heck, I'll send some of it out. And a handful of it got published. But I joke, the majority of my pieces that have been published are my poems about Boston. And I do not exclusively write about Boston by any means whatsoever, but those always seem to be the ones that get picked. So I don't know if it's just that Boston, anthologies and lit mags and all that love poems about themselves, or what it is, but that's what always winds up getting picked.
That's amazing. So what are some goals you have for your poetry and your playwright work in the future? Are you aspiring to attain a certain benchmark?
Yeah, I think that you know, comedy is where I'm really like, okay, we're doing an hour, you know, let's go to perform at these great big clubs. Let's open for people. Then let's become a feature and a headliner and all this stuff. And then the playwriting and poetry, I've always tried to not put too much pressure on myself with. It's more like, that's just like, if you want to write it, write it. And then if you have it written, remember to sit down and send it places and then see where it goes. I mean, I would love if my comedy, like, that became successful, and then my dream would be that then I could start writing plays more frequently, and, you know, it would be a bit easier to get them looked at by people, you know, that kind of a thing. But I've really always tried to let that just be more the like for fun creativity side, as opposed to the comedy, where I'm definitely a little bit rigid about like, these are your goals, you've got to do them, do X number of shows, X number of open mics, whatever it may be.
Wonderful. So how do you feel, let's go back to the comedy again, since that seems to be my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
How do you feel your comedy is going in line with your goals?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I'm proudest of is that, honestly, that I've managed to keep doing it even given this year. I mean, I was saying to you like earlier, I feel lucky that we have Zoom, as much as it's not ideal at all. Of course it isn't. A live room is so much better in so many ways, but I feel so blessed that we are doing an art form that can translate in at least some way. You know, like, my boyfriend's a musician. He can't do live like Zoom shows, you know, like, people, it doesn't feel the same for some reason, you know? So I just feel lucky that we've had that. And what I like is that now I watch my clips from the, you know, before times, and I'm like, oh, I can tell I've gotten better. I don't have great tape of it because it's all Zoom show format, but I'm excited to get back at it. And I think it's been a good time to focus on the writing specifically, because that's basically all you've got. Whereas before, I think I'd get caught up a lot in like, what's the way that I'm saying this, or how am I moving on stage and all this stuff. It's like, you can't even worry about that right now. It just has to be about the writing. So I'd say I'm proud of how the writing has grown.
Wonderful. So since you're just focusing on the writing because of COVID, then that makes the writing get stronger. But what are some other things you've done to make your specific things that have made you get stronger at writing, besides just more time?
Yeah, I definitely thrive off of setting a schedule. I know I said earlier, you can't sit down and write comedy, so I'm going to just contradict myself. But even though you can't quite do that, it is important to set aside time that you're going to organize that stuff. Because that's what I find is, like I said, I'd have all these jokes in like my phone notes, but you have to tell yourself, okay, I'm sitting down. I'm a night owl, but I did start to force myself to do this first thing in the morning. And I hate to admit it, it is so much better, but I hate saying that because I'm such a night owl and I don't like morning people. So, you know,
you have a lot of contradictions.
But before your mind is like cluttered with everything else, sitting down, that has definitely helped me. Sit down, organize your thoughts, organize your writing, force yourself to do that. Use that time to sign up for whatever open mics you're going to do that week. All that kind of stuff to just keep yourself moving forward. Because otherwise, and I mean, this of course has happened to me, like 3-4 days go by and you're like, I haven't done any comedy stuff. And I know I wanted to, I've been thinking about it and I haven't done it. So
wonderful. So while I'm talking to you, you remind me, or she reminds me of you, of Taylor Tomlinson. Do you know who I'm speaking?
Yes, yeah.
So can you see yourself one day performing with her? Because I can see it.
Oh, I would love to perform with her. She's amazing. She's incredible. I kind of just discovered her earlier this year, and I follow her on Instagram. I think she's hilarious. And yeah, I think we have very similar styles in a lot of ways. But we're different enough. I feel like we'd be good on, I mean, yeah, I would love to perform with her. She's similar. And I think She's also like kind of young, but has a very mature spirit. I think that's how I think that's what people like pull out as far as, because I've gotten that before.
She started at the same club I started at about the same time. And we all knew she was just going to take off like lightning just from the get-go.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So
I know she started very young, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, well, I don't think she came onto the public stage in our area.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she might have been doing comedy before then, but she came into our area and we became aware of her at the same time I was starting. So I've heard she started when she was like 14, and she definitely wasn't 14 when I met her. It was only 6.5 years ago. So yeah, but she's really cool. Mm-hmm. I got to be on a couple mics with her, and she's very businesslike. Very businesslike. Have you ever heard anything about her? What she's like in real life?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, you know, a lot of us were just sitting around shooting the breeze, you know, and she was all about, you know, get up, do my jokes, go to the next venue. Very businesslike, and it wasn't rude or anything like that. And then we were at a dive bar, and she was just killing at the dive bar. Nobody else could kill at the dive bar, you know. Mm-hmm. So she earned her stripes, definitely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I feel like I can be that way too sometimes. Not that I don't want to talk to people, but that I'm, especially before I perform. I think afterward, I'm like, yeah, let's all hang out. But before, I don't need to know everybody's names and all about them right away, because I'm just trying to remember my jokes and what am I doing tonight. So
yes. It's kind of like, you know, I used to be that annoying person at every club that would like, blah, 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 you know, and life's so funny. I just can't stop telling funny things. And then I get up on stage and bomb. Like, how come can't you take what you're doing here and bring it on stage? You're not. And I couldn't figure out a way to take just relating to people and bring it on stage for the longest time. Did you ever have that trouble?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've definitely had shows where even I'm doing a set that has killed many different times, but I get up there and it's like the energy is just off, and then you're in your head and it starts to spiral and you're like, the energy's off. Why is the energy off? And then that affects how you tell the next joke and the next joke. And totally. And then you leave and you're like, am I funny at all? Like we've all had, I think you have to have that moment. You have to get grounded with that moment almost, you know? But, you know, I think it's sort of like people, you know, not everybody you meet is going to like you. So not every room you perform in is going to be, you know, just the most amazing connection with that audience. But it teaches you. I mean, for me, I think looking back, it's always like, okay, when I got up on stage, was I a little bit distracted by something else or thinking about something else? Yeah, maybe. And I probably should have been more, again, in the room present, as opposed to, okay, here are my jokes and they better work because they've worked before, you know? Up to this point, have you been on stage with material you were going to use, and then something happened or something came to your mind and you totally threw out what you were going to say, and the rest of the set was all stuff that came to you? Usually I do a bit of both. I won't say I've ever done like a full set where it was unplanned, but I've definitely done a lot of like, okay, I'm going to talk about like these 3 bits, but then somebody will do something 10 minutes before and it's like, I have to talk about this. Or let's say I don't actually have this, but like, let's say I was going to lead with like a bit about airports, and then the person right before me did that. I've had situations where they've talked about topics that were so similar. It's like, yeah, my jokes are different and unique, but the audience does not want to hear about, I don't know, cheese again. They just heard about cheese, you know, whatever it is. And so I definitely had those moments where I'm like, oh, okay, we got to scrap that and like come up with something else. So I always try to have a couple ideas. And you never know when the host is going to be like, oh, we're actually doing a minute less, or we're actually doing 2 minutes more, you know? You will always have to prepare for that, for sure.
That's so cool. When was the first time that you planned, you timed it, you knew how many jokes and how much time and what to expect with laughter, and you ran short because you got so many laughs? When was that first time? Because we all were.
Oh yeah, ran short because I got so many laughs, or ran long because I got so many laughs?
Well, yeah, you didn't have enough time to do your whole material because everyone got so many laughs.
Yeah, that I have done. And with that, I try to be like, okay, great. I did my job. I got laughs. It is okay. A lot of times I do hate it if I like maybe had all material I've done before, but then a minute of new material that I'm like, I want to see how this goes. But you don't put that right at the top because you've never done it before. You put it somewhere in the middle, and then you don't even get to the middle. And that can be, I've definitely had that where I'm like, no, but I needed them to hear my new joke about whatever. But I just try to think, okay, no, we're not going to project this negative energy because the audience laughed. Like, excuse me? No, that's great. Don't even worry about it. Go do a different show, Elke. Like and you'll try it then, that's never something to complain about, for sure.
What's the worst thing somebody said, like the host or the next comic, after you got off stage? Because I'll tell you the worst thing that happened to me if you don't think of something right away.
Okay, please tell me yours.
Okay, so I'm up there and I'm in Portland, Oregon, and that's a huge LGBTQ arena, and I'm old, white, straight. Mm-hmm. And so, set up right there is funny, for me to be doing comedy there. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was hilarious that in Oregon, Michael Jackson did a movie called Free Willy, and then later in his life, he freed his Willy. So I did a whole joke about it. And then I thought it was the same week that Oprah Winfrey was made the face of Weight Watchers. And I'm like, wait a minute, we've been the one watching her weight go up and down. Why? We should get something. If she gets all this money, we're the ones doing the work, right? And I get done and the host says, oh, I didn't know we were going to have a racist grandma. And I'm like, oh, smack. Never do two jokes like that ever. I don't even do either joke, but I think they're funny. But like, am I supposed to be the one having those jokes? Probably not.
Yeah, I think I've never had anybody say anything so bad after my set, but I will say that intros, not that, it's very hard to come up with intros, but my name is quite challenging, and it is, of course, it's funny, in real life, I'm not that annoyed if you mispronounce my name. I mispronounce people's names all the time. It's not a big deal, whatever. Yeah. But in a show setting, the only thing I don't like about it is if they get my name wrong. And we're talking like I've gotten Elke Thoms before, like really bad stuff. Yeah. Then it's almost like I have to spend the first 15 seconds playing catch up. And then it also feels like I can't go right into my material because I'm like, I don't want them to think I'm Elke Thoms. I got to correct that. So you go up and you're sort of like, oh, it's this or whatever, and you make a joke about it, but it always feels like you tripped coming out of the gate a little bit is how I would describe it. So that would definitely be nothing after it has really ever affected me too much or been a problem, but that for sure. And it is consistent because obviously, and I get it, it's also like, I'm not mad at the host. Hosts have to do so much. They've got to keep track of so much. My name is confusing as hell. It makes sense. But when it happens, you're like, ugh, that's what it feels like. It's like all that momentum just into the wall because now you've got to correct that,
Yes. Yeah. Last night I was on this show, and the gentleman that we were waiting to be introduced, and they don't tell you the lineup ahead of time. And so and on deck we have Lynn Smith, and I'm like, hold up, I'm not a diva, but it's Linda Marcus Smith. And I'm in the chat going, it's Linda Marcus. Yeah. Make it public to everyone, right? Yeah. So all the audience, so he addresses it like, next one's a kind of a diva. She corrected me. I was going to say Lynn, and not only that, she has 3 names, I'm like, wow. How do I go with this one?
I think on Zoom shows, it can be tricky. Like in real life, hosts would always they'd see my name in advance and they'd be like, shit, I got to figure out how to say this. And they'd sit me down and they'd be like, say it, Elke Thoms, Elke Thoms. And I'd see them saying it a bunch of times. Zoom shows, I think it's the format's different. So a lot of times the host just sees the list of names, but they're doing 6 other things. And it's not, it's weird to ask in the whole room the pronunciation out loud. So I'm like typing it to them. So it creates way more mispronunciation situations, because it's like a lot of times I think they don't sort of see it until right at that moment and we're in front of everybody, because it's all sort of one thing. The backstage has been taken away a little bit. So for sure.
That's true. So your name is Elke, and in my day, way back in the 60s, there was a famous entertainer named Elke Summer, singer, I think she was.
Summer, yeah.
Is that who you were named after?
No, but there is a little fun pun with my name, because Elke Summer, my middle name is Winter. So I was born on like the second day of winter, so that's where it comes from. But there's a fun pun there. I remember my gym teacher in the 1st grade came up to me and was like, oh, your name's Elke, like Elke Summer. And I had no idea who she was at that point. And I was just like, I like summer. Like, I was very confused. I was like, why am I married to this season? What is going on? But no, not named after her, though she, incredible as she may be. But I obviously know of it because it's thanks to her that anybody knows how to say my name. So
yeah, I think she was from Sweden or something.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Who knows?
So do people stop you on the street and wonder if you're Taylor Swift?
No, that doesn't happen as much as, I'd like, but I do get, what I like about the Taylor Swift thing is, and I do make a joke about this sometimes, is everybody, I get a lot of reactions where they feel they are the first person to have had this thought. Like, I get a lot of like, has anyone ever told you? And I've gotten other celebrities, and with other celebrities, like I'm trying to think of who, but it's like Scarlett Johansson. Somebody said that once, but they were like, I bet you get this all the time, but has anybody ever told you? And I was like, no, actually nobody has ever told me that. But Taylor Swift people, and I mean, I'm a huge Swiftie, so I don't even know that it's you're a fan or you just think I look like her or whatever, but they're always like, I bet you have no idea, but do you know you look like Taylor Swift? Like, I don't know why, but the Taylor Swift people with the compliment are always like, she is going to have never heard this before, which is funny because Taylor Swift is incredible and we've all heard of her. So like, of course, but.
That's so funny. I say that people think I look like Marilyn Monroe and I make fun of it. It's like my best self-deprecating joke that I love to tell, because like, how silly to compare me to Marilyn Monroe, Oh,
I see it for sure. Mm-hmm.
I don't. So I have fun with that. And I could write an hour of, retorts to that compliment, like all sarcastic and self-deprecating and make people feel sorry for me. What's the thing that you like to talk about that maybe other people don't really, find relatable, but you love talking about it?
Ooh, that's interesting. I feel like I struggle as a comedian where sometimes I write things and I'm like, nobody's going to want to hear about this. It feels so specific to me. But it's kind of like the fencing thing. Like I was like, nobody's going to want to hear this joke about me fencing, because who's done that? It's not like a sport that a lot of people have done, or even the people that have done it. It's like, do they care? I think that so much of comedy is, for me anyway, like my experience has been kind of getting out of my head about that and being like, no, people are going to want to talk. If people are going to want to hear about it, if you're into it. Because when I think about performances that I like, it's like, yeah, they could be talking about a subject that I don't know what, they could be talking about like water polo, I don't care. I've never done it. I'm thrilled to be hearing about it. It's great when you get comedy and also a little education. So I think I try not to stay on one topic for too long. That's what I have noticed. Nobody wants to hear you talk about your mom. I love talking about my mom because she's hilarious, but nobody wants to hear you talking about your mom for the whole 10 minutes. That's what I've noticed. Nobody wants to hear about you talk about just your family for the whole 10 minutes. You need to do a little, oh, hello.
Another booty call.
Yes, I know.
Road. They're looking for her.
I always say to myself, okay, let's break it up a little. You can do something about family, maybe something about friends, maybe something about dating, but don't have it be all one subject, because you never know. There's always somebody in the audience that's like, I've heard too much about dating today, or I've heard too much about people's parents today. So you've got to break it up. But other than that, I think that's the biggest thing is for me, any subject, just breaking it up like that.
I have just one more question for you, Elke, before I leave it wide open for you to say anything I haven't asked, so people get a real drift of who you are. You get to have 2 to 5 minutes to just wrap up anything I didn't ask and anything you want people to know. But before I do that, I just want to know, when you are on stage, what is your persona and how do you make sure people get your persona? So you have your jokes, your bag of tricks, and you have your delivery style, but beyond that, there's like a character that comes out. And what is that persona?
Wow, I feel like that question is like the voice in my head every time I sit down to write. Like, what's your persona, Elke? What is it?
Hey, that's a good thing to have in your head when you're writing.
It is. Well, I think it's another. It's another thing that I'm always working on. I would say that my persona is on stage is me. I try to think of it as like, okay, if I'm telling this joke, I'm now an expert on that thing. Not that thing necessarily, but the experience. I'm an expert on it because I've looked back on it and I've written a joke about it. But when I'm telling the joke, I always try to remember, tell it from the perspective that you were in when this was happening to you. So I think that naturally that comes off as like, I'm a little bit more like confused or hesitant or like, what's going on? Whereas in real life, I might see myself as a little bit, I try to not come off as so intense and responsible as I am in real life. On stage, I try to be a little more goofy, a little more relaxed, but also not too far from myself, because I'm not the best at pretending to be something that I'm not. So I think the biggest thing I do, honestly, is just try to be authentic with the audience. Obviously you've got to be a little bigger and all that, but I try to not put myself in a box and be like, just be, this is so cheesy, just be you, and hopefully that will come across well.
Absolutely. Well, I want to give the floor to you because you've been an amazing person to interview. You've made up for some really flat interviews I've done in the last couple of months. Sometimes you get somebody that just says yes, no, or they're like, well, actually, and they're like, oh, please don't correct me. It's cool. Just let it go. What would you like people to know about you from your own words? Because they might tune into the beginning of the interview or watch the whole thing or just come and see the end. So now's your chance to capture them and get them to follow you and support you.
Yeah, I think if they watch the whole thing, they'll be more an expert on me than I am. So that's pretty remarkable. Well, I want to say thank you to you, of course, for having me. And I would just say, honestly, okay, yes, I have a show tomorrow night with Dow Comedy Studio. All the information is on my Instagram and Facebook. I am at Elke Thoms everywhere because it's a unique name. So follow me. I'm posting all that info. I've got another show next Saturday as well. So we've got Zoom shows for you. That's the first thing. But I just want to say thank you to anybody who has watched, even if you're watching this and it wasn't me, any sort of live Zoom comedy, because I saw a joke at the beginning of the pandemic that was like, all these Zoom shows just seem like AA meetings, but they're for comics that just need attention. Like that's not my tweet. I saw that tweet online and it felt a little true at the beginning, but now it's become so much more than that, where I'm just so grateful that anybody takes the time to tune in. Even though it's the pandemic, you've got a lot of different choices for what you can watch and do. and it's not as great as a live show, but I think it does provide a lot of nice human connections. So I'm just very grateful to everybody who's taken the time to do that. And now I'm getting comics anxiety. I'm like, was that my 2 minutes? Was that my 3 minutes? So that's all I've got. But I so appreciate you're doing this. This has been so fun.
So wonderful. And do you have a play coming up in the works?
Yes. So all my exes walk into a bar. What's the name of my play again? Is being performed by the Chameleon Theatre Circle. They're doing it as a staged reading. However, it will likely be over Zoom. So again, follow me in all the various places, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, kind of on TikTok. Not that I'd post any of that there. You know what? Just stick to those three. At Elke Thoms. And I will always post that information, and hopefully it'll be a Zoom recording that is published and that you can go view. So yeah, that's where you would find that.
It's awesome. So I've been holding back a pun about your fencing. May I?
Please, please.
I was going to go out for fencing, but I was too on guard.
I love it. There you go. You're ready for all those fencing tournaments where they need a comic, you know? I know that's going to be my niche, so.
Thank you so much, Elke Thoms. You guys, let's get out and let's support her comedy career and watch her and support her and get to know her and follow her. She's delightful, isn't she? Thank you, Elke Thoms.
Thank you.
Miss you already.
Aw.
Bye.
Bye.